Welcome back to TYT Interviews. We're doing a round of interviews on national security and civil liberties. Next on our list is Kirk Wiebe. He is a longtime member of the NSA, and he's now an outspoken activist against some of what the NSA is doing. He won the National Meritorious Unit Citation for the Director of Central Intelligence Agency. He won the Meritorious Civilian Service Award, which is the NSA's second highest honor, and now he's speaking out about some of their abuses. Kirk, welcome to the Young Turks.
It's good to be here with you, Jake. Thank you.
Yeah, now I noticed your name is actually J. Kirk Wiebe, and it's obvious it's because you're James T. Kirk Wiebe, but I don't want to out you too much here. But you see, you're not the only one collecting intelligence, okay? I see you.
No, that's right.
All right, so Kirk, tell me about when you first joined the NSA and why you joined and your experience there before things started to go bad.
Sure. I joined the United States Air Force right out of high school in 1963. I wasn't ready for college. I had itchy feet. I wanted to see something of the world before I settled down to do more academics. So I joined the Air Force. The Air Force selected me for Russian language training and to work with the Air Force in its intelligence arm called the United States Air Force Security Service at that time. That name has since changed, but the function still exists. Mm-hmm. After technical training and language training at Indiana University, the Air Force sent me to Turkey for my first overseas assignment. And I was assigned at a small air station about 90 miles south of, a little southeast of Istanbul, called Karamürsel Air Station. Mm-hmm. And that's where I began my familiarity with intelligence work.
So, Kirk,
I was in Turkey. Yes.
Let me interrupt you for a second to just ask you a quick follow-up to that. So, while you were in Turkey, how many coups did you organize?
No, I thoroughly enjoyed my time in Turkey, and politics wasn't part of it. I was in an open-minded, ingest the culture, learn a little bit about the language and the customs of the people, and I just have the fondest memories of all of that.
Okay, good. So then what happened next in your career?
All right, so after Turkey, they told me they were going to send me back to the States because I only had 12 months left in my commitment to the Air Force. And I said, I don't want to do that. I want to go stay overseas. And they said, well, if you extend your service by 3 months, we'll send you to northern Japan. So I accepted assignment at Wakkanai Air Station on the northern tip of the northernmost island in Japan, Hokkaido. And on a clear day, you could see the southern tip of Kamchatka of the Soviet Union across the water. So I was there, but only for about a year because I wanted to go back to school. I wanted to get my education. The Air Force didn't want me to stay in intelligence. I wanted to become an officer, go to officers training. They said the only way you can do that is become a navigator in an aircraft. And I said, I don't want to do that, so I'm going to get out of the military. Applied for an early out to begin school at the school year, the beginning of the school year. So in September of 1967, I found myself at Indiana University again. That was my home state in IU, and of course I had done my Russian language training there. So it was natural to return there. So I did that, got a bachelor's degree in Russian 2 years later, and then took a little diversion into the business world, the sales world, for about 2 or 3 years until I decided I missed the intelligence work, but decided to go get a master's degree in Russian first. So I went back to Indiana, got a master's degree in Russian. Then I applied to go to the National Security Agency. So in June of 1975, I find myself at the front doors of the NSA. And after a little bit of initial training and orientation, I found myself doing essentially transcription work, which is to take language material and either render it voice material and render it in Russian, or actually transliterate it, or to even translate it in some cases. So I did that for a number of years. then moved into analysis, and then into management of collection and data processing, and ultimately a tour with the information technology branch of NSA. And my last assignment then was in this small research organization working with Ed Loomis, fellow whistleblower, Bill Binney, fellow whistleblower, on some of the more difficult technical challenges that the NSA was facing with the advent of the internet and networked communications.
So, okay, so now this is where it gets really interesting. What program were you guys working on at the time, and was this pre-9/11?
Yeah, pre-9/11, I actually joined Binney and Loomis working in this small research organization that's very focused on how to deal with the three big challenges that the internet posed. And the first one was the volume of data, so much. Everybody can relate to their email queue and that it's always out of control. But the volume of data that's present when you have these large fiber optic pipes and so forth carrying hundreds of millions of bits of information, and globally from around the world. So all these networks were connecting, the volume was going up geometrically, the speed of the data, it's the speed of light, and that volume is traveling at the speed of light. So the information's changing rapidly and morphing rapidly. And then, of course, there's the variety of information. There's video, there's voice, there's text, there's documents, there's email, chat, you just name it, Facebook, et cetera, et cetera. So all of these things were different types of data, many in foreign languages. How do you deal with that issue? And how do you sort through it all so that you can find criminal or terrorist activity? And that was the challenge that small organization was working on.
And how did you guys meet that challenge? What program did you create that you thought might help with that?
We put together, after much experimentation and failure, a small, and I say small because the idea was not to actually build a production model capability. It was to build a prototype that you could demonstrate to decision makers that the approach we were using was functional and would work against real information, producing real results. And it was called ThinThread. So it was a model program, I guess I would say. And if it were decided that it was a good thing and people liked it, then they could simply scale it to the size necessary and deploy it wherever they needed to. It was called ThinThread. It had a data input capability, a data sorting capability, and it also had something that's very appropriate for the discussion today. And that was it had a feature to ensure the privacy of innocent people was not invaded. If it was not a known criminal or terrorist or someone highly suspected of being one of those, a person's identifying information in this data gathering part of the system would encrypt it. It would actually encrypt that information and take it and put it somewhere else safe so that no analyst browsing around in the database could find it, let alone understand it, because the data was locked up in encryption. So we built that in to comply with the Fourth Amendment of the United States, which says you're not to collect the information or the personal effects of innocent people without a court order. You have to have a probable cause, a warrant, if you will. And that's the guidance we were all brought up with inside NSA back then. This is before the rules changed. And we honored those even in the way we built the system.
So I want to get to that cultural change in a minute, but let me ask about why ThinThread was put down. And I'm sure that it's largely because of that cultural change, but I'm curious as to how it went down. I know that they went instead with a program called Trailblazer, and that was partly because of cronyism, which you could talk about in a second. But was one of the problems with ThinThread, in your opinion, that it did protect people's privacy, and the higher ups at the NSA didn't really want to do that?
Yeah, that's a key point, Cenk, and that really is the crux of the issue. Why didn't they want to do that? And we could guess about why they didn't want to do that, but I think they believed they were going to get the legal authority from the Department of Justice to do away with that requirement, that it was not a Fourth Amendment issue. And as we now know, in all the discussion that's ensued since the Snowden leaks, it all falls on a 1979 court case called Government versus Smith versus Maryland, is how it began, but it ended up in the Supreme Court. And it involved a criminal and his phone number, and the fact that the police recorded the phone number to use a phone call as evidence that the criminal contacted his victim. It was a theft. It wasn't even a murder. But that key precedent then led lawyers in the Department of Justice under Gonzalez and Addington and you, all in DOJ when Bush was in, to interpret the law such that it meant this kind of information, metadata, which is addressing information basically. It's like the address on an envelope. It's like an email address. That kind of information didn't enjoy the protections of the Fourth Amendment of the United States. Now this is, remember, 1979. There really was not a palpable internet to most of us in 1979. It was pretty much in government, wasn't out to the general public. We certainly didn't have all the electronic devices that you see today with iPads and iPhones, and we didn't even have cellular phones, the general public. But with the advent of all those devices, it changes the ball game. We now are able to collect metadata from on one person from multiple sources, including every time they swipe a credit card, including every time they are photographed by a traffic camera. And now we're talking license plate scanners en masse collecting data about people's automobiles and where they were seen and when. We collect the data from passive transponders that you use on freeway, actually tollways, so that when you get on, it gives you a location, an exit number, a date and a time, and when you get off, it does the same, so it can calculate a charge against your credit card that you've put up for repayment. So this day and age we live in is collecting, can produce all these little trace elements of dates and times and where you were throughout your day, to the point now where you can actually track a person in their daily activities. And I haven't even talked about their use of the computer yet.
So Kirk, let me pause there for a second. So now we had this precedent back in 1979, but the Bush guys come in at the end of 2000, and then they decide, well, we're going to use that old precedent to get all this metadata. And if you're calling your bookie, we're going to know. If you're calling your local pot dealer, we're going to know. If you're calling, your mistress or your hooker or whatever, we're going to know.
Exactly.
We're going to collect all this information on you. But of course, often in the public, they'll say, well, that we live in a post 9/11 world. But did their attempts to collect this information start before 9/11?
Yes, it actually began before 9/11, a number of months before. The best we can tell, perhaps as early as April-May time frame of 2000, that there was a move afoot to collect data from the businesses that are generating it, as opposed to going out and tapping some large fiber optic line to collect it. Now, so there was a philosophical change here. Why go and bother and build collection systems when you can just buy data from industry that's providing services to people? So there's a philosophical change right there. Now, how does that relate to ThinThread? It really doesn't. ThinThread really didn't care what kind of data you put into it. It was really the filtering, the selection, and the relationships between people that we were trying to capture. But of course, criminal people, not innocent people. You can't waste analytic time looking at innocent people. It will take you forever. There's too many people in the world. So you need, that was another philosophy that they tended not to buy into. It was attractive to go out and collect all this bulk collection of data to have it, because they thought they may need it someday. In other words, you may not be a criminal today, but you may be a year from now. And they wanted to have all this data stored up, and we think that's why Utah was built. Utah could store 50 years, maybe as much as 100 years of the world's internet traffic and data movement management. So, yeah, they want to do retroactive search, and we just thought that's absurd. It's an absurd way to go about solving problem that you got to solve now. You know, retroactive analysis, that's like what the FBI does after a crime's happened. That's the sort of forensic analysis. The idea is to prevent an attack from happening, not clean up after it's already happened. So there was a falling out. The director, Hayden, also made some very bad errors when he was going after Trailblazer. And by the way, Cenk, Trailblazer was nothing but PowerPoint slides when we had ThinThread operating. So we said to them, look, you're going to go off on a very risky gambit here. Why don't you use ThinThread as a risk mitigation strategy? In other words, you got something that works, use it, learn from it, build the qualities you like into Trailblazer, and then go forward with Trailblazer, and you'll increase your odds of success. They ignored that. They literally trashed ThinThread because they saw it as a competitor in the eyes of Congress, where you get your money. And if Congress were to learn that we had a cheap way to solve this problem, the director was going to have a hard time getting the billions out of Congress that he wanted. So there were lots of reasons not to do ThinThread. And oh, by the way, not the least of which was it was built in-house. We didn't go to big industry. We didn't go to Silicon Valley and ask for someone to solve it, but the director did, only to be told a couple of years later that Silicon Valley didn't have what the director wanted. And so Trailblazer ends up a huge failure, probably the worst intelligence failure in U.S. history.
So let's pause there again to get a little bit more clarity. So we had ThinThread that you were describing earlier. It limits the privacy intrusions. It's already operational, and it's much cheaper. Then they bring in Trailblazer, which has the privacy violations, or was going to if it worked, and it costs billions of dollars. So part of the motivation I can see is the director wants a bigger budget. Everybody always wants a bigger budget. So he goes in, he pitches this, and it sounds fancy, and it, I guess, puffs up his career. But I'm a little curious about the cronyism too. So for this other program, Trailblazer, which never wound up actually working, who got rich off of that? And was there any connections to the people that worked in the government at that time, or worked in the government at that time and would later work in private industry?
Oh yeah, you've nailed it, Cenk. A guy named Bill Black became Hayden's deputy director. Bill Black had been at NSA his entire career. He had retired and gotten a job with SAIC. SAIC is one of the largest beltway bandits in the Washington area. And it's a huge corporation and a huge company that feeds heavily off the U.S. government dole, taxpayers' money. Black came out of SAIC, out of retirement, out of his job at SAIC, and became deputy director. That raised a lot of eyebrows right away, but nobody really objected. Nobody was going to fight that. And you got to think of Congress. What's Congress doing? Congress is supposed to provide oversight over these kinds of things, and especially issues of integrity and ensuring that the taxpayers' money is spent well. Well, as Trailblazer showed, and Black was there the entire time, SAIC benefited hugely and directly from the entire Trailblazer program, as did other common names such as Northrop Grumman. What's the big one in Virginia? It escapes me at this moment. Harris Corporation is one, and there's one that one of the former directors went to. So, this just shows you what we call the military-industrial intelligence complex. Eisenhower warned the American people about business having undue influence on government. The whole Trailblazer fiasco is a perfect example of what happens when that happens, because we do have a military-industrial intelligence complex now, rather than a straight government functioning institution. The two have basically melded, and the buying of data only expands that kind of relationship that's way too close between business and government.
So that revolving door, on top of all the civil liberties violations, also leads us to wasting billions of dollars in taxpayer money.
Absolutely correct.
Right. And so one more thing about the cultural change before we get to the whistleblowing and the dramatic consequences of that. So I imagine there was a lot of people at the NSA that were in your camp, and the people that grew up in an organization that actually tried to collect intelligence and didn't try to violate American people's privacy, et cetera. And then when does that cultural change happen? Is it just overnight when the Bush guys come in, when Hayden comes in, or was it through this military-industrial complex that was already seeping in? I don't know, so that's why I'm asking. How did that cultural change happen, and when did it fully take over?
Well, that is a terrific question, and a little bit complex, but I'll make it simple as I can. The thing that opens the door to it, that initiates the momentum, is the end of the Cold War. Mm-hmm. Right after the Berlin Wall goes down and the Cold War is declared over and there's no more Soviet Union, people talked about a peace dividend. People inside the intelligence community, although we had a list of things to work on, there was sort of a vacuum. There wasn't anything, quote, as sexy or as ominous as the Soviet Union and the nuclear threat had been. And, they played mind games. The nuclear threat was still there under Russia. Nobody dismantled those missiles, not one of them. And so the threat was there, but people used this as an argument to look elsewhere. Well, in the mid-90s, the name Osama bin Laden began to be heard in the hallways. And then we have the famous incident where Senator Hatch divulges the fact that the government was listening to bin Laden or his close associates on a satellite phone, and we lost that capability. That's a true security leak, by the way, and a very damaging one. So we actually lost a very important source of information. But the point is, people are looking now more closely at this thing called terrorism and discovering that it's not like a nation. It's not like a definable with borders. It cuts across countries. It's a movement. It's religious. It has commitment. It is a different beast than worrying about missiles coming out of a silo. So more and more attention began to be paid to this problem called radical Islam, radical Islam terrorism, etc. But people weren't quite sure how to go about it because, the Soviet communications, they had been well understood and defined in people's minds. But this way of working across national lines in a terrorist movement was not well understood. So it was a sharp learning curve, and a lot of errors made, of course. But little by little, we began to establish a capability, and all of that tied into the internet, just like others. Terrorists like to use the internet too. It's very convenient, it's fast, it has different facets to it. As I mentioned, different types of information. You can have pictures, you can have text, etc. So this whole thing changes with a focusing on terrorism. But as this internet thing is growing and it's not being addressed correctly, remember, they threw ThinThread away. ThinThread, one of its greatest strengths besides privacy was its ability to sort through information and only pluck out relevant information, very suspicious, involving terrorism and items and things related to terrorism. So they threw that out, and so for the next, I would say after we retired, NSA flounders with ThinThread. I'm sorry, with Trailblazer until it's declared a failure in 2005. But all the time they're doing this, billions of dollars are being thrown at NSA by Congress, and these large corporations are only too happy to provide manpower and supposed solutions. Many millionaires resulted from the whole Trailblazer contracting scheme. Now, Trailblazer wasn't the end. Although we don't know the names of everything, Snowden's helped us put a list together, certainly, that came after Trailblazer, after 2005. There have been billions and billions and billions spent since then, and the contractors have built buildings next to NSA and actually have a contractor city, so to speak, just across Maryland Route 295 from Fort Meade. So the military-industrial intelligence complex is thriving, and going full speed ahead.
Okay, so now at what point in this whole process did you decide, hey, things are going awry here, and I'm going to step up publicly and talk about what's going wrong?
That happened since we retired, which was the 31st of October 2001, about 6 weeks after 9/11. We already saw the writing on the wall. We had been resisted. We knew we were going to lose this battle. So we thought, and since we were the three of us, Binney, Weeby, Loomis, were all eligible for retirement, we thought the best thing we could do is leave the agency, retire. Immediately, form a small consulting business, and try to bring what we knew, the knowledge that we had, the expertise, into the government through a different agency, a different path. And we did that. We formed a small company, and we first went to Boeing, and we ended up doing a technology demonstration there that was very successful. So successful, by the way, that it would embarrass NSA if it were made public, because it involved the analysis of data that NSA said was worthless. Now, I'm not at liberty to tell you what that data was, but let's just say that in addition to NSA, another agency had the same data for different reasons, but it was the same data. We found things in that data that involved a very high priority intelligence subject, according to the U.S. government. This actually led to us being let go. Our contract on that effort was stopped because a senior executive was heard by two people to say, we have to stop this contract. These guys are going to embarrass NSA. So that program was stopped.
Okay, I'm confused by that. So why, okay, how did you have access to data if you were already outside the NSA, and how would it embarrass NSA? I'm not sure I'm clear on that.
Yeah, we retained our security clearances. If you indicate, or if you start a business, NSA allows people to leave and then form a business and ask to keep their clearances if they're going to work on valid government contracts anywhere in the government for anyone else, because clearances really aren't owned by NSA. The community uses them as they need them in whatever agency, whether it's NSA or CIA or DIA, Department of Homeland Security, etc. So there's pretty much a security broker that does the background investigations. That process has come closer together because it was being repeated by too many different companies between the Department of Defense and the rest of the government. So some people are faulting it for not picking up on, quote, Snowden's background, but frankly, I didn't know that Snowden had a bad background, so I'm not sure if that isn't a political thing. But to continue with your point, we were allowed to keep our clearances. We had to apply to keep them, and they were granted. And as long as we were using them against a valid contract, which we were. So that's how we were able to keep our clearances. But the contract we were working on was stopped because of fears we would embarrass NSA. And in other words, you're right. You're shocked by that because most people would say, well, if you did something good, why don't you go over and show NSA how to do it? You know, why do we stop the program? Why do we stop doing well with intelligence to stop embarrassing another agency? But that was the culture, and still may be at the very high levels of management in the intelligence community. There's really a camaraderie, and I won't put something in your punch bowl if you don't put something in my punch bowl. So we need to get, you know, it's surround wagons and let's protect the club, basically. Mm-hmm. So we were let go from that contract, got an invitation to go work over at the Department of Homeland Security, Customs and Border Patrol. And in the space of about a little over a year, we made another huge intelligence discovery and were let go again because we had embarrassed the standing, existing status quo efforts going against those intelligence issues. They weren't seeing them, we were. So again, we come to a point where we're just, our contract is stopped. The good news is, after that contract was stopped, my friend Bill Biddy and I continued to do analysis on this particular issue. And by the way, I can tell you about this one, Cenk, without violating rules of classification, because the source of the tip-off of this came from the Department of Commerce. I was sitting where I'm sitting right now, reading my email, and I was a member of a news group. And one of the guys on this news group posted an item from Commerce called it's called the Business Intelligence Bureau Review Bureau. And what it does is it warns American businesses about businesses overseas that are involved in terrorism, criminality, etc., to put a red flag up to make sure people on this end, our businesses here in the U.S., don't get tied up in them. Well, this article described the fact that the information about these businesses, and it listed 4 or 5 of them, a couple of names of people, a few addresses, and it said it was discovered by the U.S. Army on a hard drive in Iraq, in a house where terrorists had been present. And that these businesses were involved in the import of electronic pieces of electronic technology needed to put together triggering devices for IEDs. Mm-hmm. Okay? And so when I saw this information, and being that I fully understood that Customs and Border Patrol, a lot of people think all they do is enforce the borders. They're also responsible, Cenk, for ensuring the safety and the efficacy of all goods imported and exported through our ports in the United States. And that's a huge task. Think of all the shipping containers that come in from the world on ships at all of our major ports and that are shipped out. Mm-hmm. So one of the scenarios for terrorism was worry that someone would put a delayed nuclear device in a shipping container, put it on a boat, have it pull into Los Angeles harbor, and then someone detonate it, or a time device would detonate it, etc. All valid concerns. So it was serious work. Well, I took this information from Commerce, that was freely available to anybody, and that includes other agencies in the government. I took it into Customs and Border Patrol, asked them to look at their databases. Make a long story short, we made a huge breakthrough that got reported up through management. And 2 years later, 7 or 8 people were arrested in Florida that were tied in with this activity, arrested by the FBI. Now, Bill Binney and I, who did the analysis on this and sent the results to the Pentagon and back to Customs and Border Patrol free, gratis. This is just trying to help the nation deal with the various threats that we encounter. We got no pay, no nothing, no recognition or anything except an email saying, "You guys are great Americans, thank you." So, and that was all we wanted, was the thanks from one person in the government. But isn't it odd that 2 guys who are out trying to do a good job under contracts are being stopped because they're embarrassing other agencies who are supposed to be doing the same work but aren't doing it? So isn't that called helping your nation? We become persona non grata. I mean, that's the culture that we were up against.
Yeah.
So
Well, Kirk,
after that experience, we stopped. We stopped trying to work for the government anymore after that. And then we were raided, by the way.
So I want to get to that in 1 second, but I recognize the big mistake that you guys made, and it wasn't in doing your job. It wasn't in, you know, whether it's protecting privacy or actually collecting intelligence that helps protect the country. You made the mistake of becoming a small business instead of joining a large business.
You got it.
If you had joined if you joined one of the large private contractors, you'd be rich by now, doing all this stuff. Instead, you guys went head up against them and you got steamrolled.
You got it.
Okay. So
I cannot argue with that one bit.
Okay. So then why did you, okay, so you're doing all this stuff. Okay, it's annoying some people for political reasons because you're showing their deficiencies. Everybody gets that, right? But why do you get raided? What happened there? Well,
the part that I didn't tell you yet was that back in 2002, when we left NSA because we could and because we saw it going down the wrong path and throwing privacy out the window. So we leave, but we continued to monitor what NSA was doing at a high level on this issue because Tom Drake continued to work there. Now he's the other whistleblower. He's the one that eventually the government goes after in court, but actually plea bargains, he achieves a plea bargain and all the charges are dropped except for a misdemeanor. But in 2002, when we saw them continuing down the wrong path, we decided we couldn't stand by and do nothing. And the one thing we could do is report the malfeasance, the mismanagement, the waste of public money by writing a letter to the United States Department of Defense Inspector General. Not the Inspector General at NSA that works for the director of NSA. He was part of the problem. So we went up a level, directed that letter to the DOD IG, who took up the matter, who thought there was merit to it, the way we described it in the letter. 3 years later, they issued a report, but the report was so heavily classified, Cenk, that the average person could make nothing of it. In fact, you can find it online. It's a 99.9% blank pages. It's a laugh. You just go, what is this? Mm-hmm. Some people are trying to get it declassified because it has no reason being classified. There's no classified information. It was all about management and the handling and the mishandling of money. It wasn't national secrets. But the way the agency treats embarrassment is to classify it. Always has, always has. And so that's a little bit of a battle that's ongoing right now. A request has been made to unclassify it. We'll see where that goes. Suffice it to say, the report found in our favor that ThinThread would have been the better way to go, and that Trailblazer was not the way to go. But that report, we think, is what set up animosity. The fact that we actually turned an investigation against NSA, somebody, and to this day, Hayden says it wasn't him, Now, maybe it was Keith Alexander, the guy that came next at NSA, don't know. Someone launched a FBI raid saying that we were connected to James Risen leak article in the New York Times of December 2006 or 5, I guess it was, that disclosed the fact that NSA was looking at the information of innocent Americans back then. So if you read the affidavit for our search, it says that's the reason that they came to raid us, was for connection to that leak. Well, there was no evidence of it. It was contrived. I didn't even know who James Risen was at the time. So in any case, they contrived the matter.
So the government that you had been serving your whole life, going all the way back to the early 1960s, that you'd won awards for, you'd done all these things for, next thing you know, almost literally bust down your door with an FBI raid. Same for Binney. My understanding is that they put a gun to his head and got him naked out of the shower, etc. And
they did.
And so, and did that ever reach a conclusion? They say, oh, we think you're working with, oh my God, journalists, which, okay, now they had already been violating the Fourth Amendment. Now they're violating the First Amendment, and they're, you know, and you're using coercive state power to do it, etc. But in the end, was there any merit to any of that? Did that get concluded?
No. In fact, literally as you and I speak, the 5 of us, Rourke, Loomis, Binney, myself, and Drake, are getting our computers and our computer data back from that raid that was conducted on the 26th of July, 2007. We took them to court for taking our stuff unlawfully. They had never been challenged like this before, and we did not hire a lawyer, Cenk. We knew intelligence as much as the next guy, and this was either you did it right or you did it wrong, and we knew they did it wrong, and we shouldn't have been raided. So we went to the court, the Maryland District Court, a federal court here in Baltimore, filed it, and over the past year and a half, finally got resolved that we get our computers back, which NSA did not want to give back, and we get our data back. Less a couple of things that NSA claims is sensitive. They tried to say it was classified. We said, prove it. It's not. They declined. They wouldn't do it. We know what it is. It's the emails that we had all sent amongst each other about what was going wrong at NSA, and a lot of it's embarrassing. And they did not want that data out there as evidence of wrongdoing. So they simply retained it.
So this entire story informs the NSA, informs us about the NSA culture and the gross overreaction to Edward Snowden, et cetera. You know, because the number one thing they want to avoid is political embarrassment. And,
absolutely right.
And they don't want to stop the gravy train. The gravy, you know, we violate people's privacy, et cetera, whatever. People are making money, right? And so
you got it.
That's a huge motivating factor, right? So now,
yes.
Finally, though, I know the raid happened in 2007. You know, you've been wrongly, you know, charged. You know, your house is busted into, and you know, and allegations against you, all this stuff. But it's okay, because in 2008 we get a president who wins, who campaigned on change. So I'm sure that he changed all this, right, Kirk?
Well, you know, our attorney actually, Bill Binney and I got an attorney, the same attorney after that raid. He had been a federal prosecutor for the government. And he said to us, don't worry, this was all under Bush. When Obama comes in, this will all go away. Obama came in, not one bit of it went away. In fact, in November of 2009, a guy named Tyrell, a prosecutor with the DOJ, called our lawyer, Bill's and my lawyer, and said, I'm coming after your 2 guys. And our attorney said that would be a mistake. And we hear nothing more until February of 2010, actually January, when we're told that a new prosecutor wants to give us letters of immunity if we'll meet with him about Thomas Drake and answer some questions. So between November, you know, that intervening few months, this whole thing changes, They don't want to go after us. Well, they didn't have anything to go after us on. That's the first thing. So it didn't change at all, Jay.
So Thomas Drake's a whistleblower. So what they want to say is they want to intimidate you, say we're going to go after you, and then use that as leverage to say, okay, now give us dirt on Thomas Drake because, like Snowden, et cetera, he revealed things that actually helped the American people but embarrassed the government. So they're going to try to they're going to try to flip you guys. Obviously, that didn't work, and instead you continued on the path that you are now. I guess the last question then is, unfortunately, the question we run into each time on this issue, which is that, you know, we get why the Bush guys did it. You know, you mentioned Addington, Alberto Gonzales, et cetera. They had a different philosophy, you know, which is that the Fourth Amendment doesn't matter that much. We're going to give money to the private contractors, and we know what that's about. And it started before the Bush guys, as you just explained, right? But the Bush guys accelerated, right? And the Bush guys accelerated, et cetera. So who is Obama? Is he just another extension of this? Is he a guy adrift in that culture and doesn't know how to stop it? Or does he enjoy that culture and thinks, oh, okay, well, you know, they've been profiting off of this for decades and not really solving anything. And by the way, we didn't get intelligence on 9/11. We didn't get intelligence on so many different attacks. But who cares because we're all getting rich? Is he part of that system? Right now he appears to be the head of that system. But yeah. You know, as someone who's intimately involved in this, what's your read on him? Is he a maintainer of that system, or does he feel that he's powerless to stop it?
He's a maintainer of that system. There's a small part of him that I think truly believes the NSA is out of control. But I don't think he believes it strongly enough to take a major step. So you saw his announcement a month ago. The panel he had put together had made recommendations. Now he's asked the Attorney General and an insider in the White House to study this issue towards transitioning away from bulk collection of data into something more focused along the line, Fourth Amendment requiring not probable cause, but reasonable suspicion. And this is a key point, Cenk. We can't let the population be snowed by the language. That's a key difference. When you move from probable cause, which is a higher standard of proof, backward to reasonable suspicion, you are literally rewriting the Bill of Rights, the Fourth Amendment, without using the process prescribed in the Constitution to do that. In other words, you're doing it extra constitutionally. You're doing it illegally. And we're still trying to base the government's efforts on that Smith versus Maryland case from 1979, which I hope sincerely gets up to the Supreme Court, because when you collect the data, all this metadata on people today, in this day and age, in 2014, you can track someone better than if you put a personal FBI tail on them.
Yep. Yeah, that's right. Google knows every place you've ever been. The FBI couldn't possibly track you that well. And
right.
A lot has changed in that 35 years. Let's hope the people on the Supreme Court, if it gets up there, recognize that. Sometimes they do and sometimes they don't. But somebody's got to put a check on it, and it's obviously not going to be the Obama administration. All right, Kirk.
Absolutely correct.
Kirk Wiebe, one of the heroes in this fight, fighting to make sure that we protect our constitutional rights and that we get the bad guys. Both are very, very important. Unfortunately, we haven't been doing a very good job in either. Thank you so much for joining us on the Young Turks. Really appreciate it.
Allah Saladik.
Okay. Good day, good day.